The boy dragged his sack of firewood, a phantom limb he was condemned to pull through the heart of town. Every day the whispers followed him, the averted gazes, the chilling silence. He was a ghost walking among the living, scorned by all of Glenmore, until the brutal cold bit too deep and he simply collapsed. Everyone turned their backs, every single person, every shopkeeper, every parent, every child. They walked around him as if he were nothing more than a stain on the frozen ground. Everyone, that is, except one lone soldier. And what he did next would shatter the town's cold indifference, forcing them to confront a truth they had desperately tried to bury. "You dragging that damn sack of wood through here again?" Mrs. Mullins's voice, sharp as shards of ice, sliced through the bitter morning air echoing from the butcher's shop. 12-year-old Jace didn't answer. His head remained bowed, hands clamped tight on the worn rope, pulling the massive sack of firewood across the dirt road. His tattered shoes slipped on the icy slope, leaving faint, cracked marks in the frozen ground. Glenmore, a small, quiet town, had never been peaceful for Jace. The fire from years ago, the one that turned his parents into nothing more than names whispered in hushed tones, still stained the main street. Dark soot clung to the bricks along the road, a permanent scar, as if the town itself insisted on preserving the mark, a punishment not just for the dead, but for anyone left behind. The sack rustled roughly behind him, one side torn, a jagged chunk of wood scraping the ground with a dry, hollow thud. It weighed nearly as much as Jace, maybe more, yet he didn't stop. Left hand on the rope, right hand out for balance. He had to sell this firewood. He needed to trade it for cough medicine for Ellie, his little sister, the only family he had left, lying sick in their wooden cabin at the forest's edge. A freezing wind swept down the dirt slope. Not a single ray of sunlight pierced the thick, lead-gray clouds of winter. Shops began to open, but most who saw Jace quickly turned away. A man pulled his young son close, whispering, "Don't look at him. That family's nothing but trouble." As Jace neared the bend by the town square, a sharp creak pierced the air. The wooden wheel under his cart protested, then snapped. The sack tilted, slamming to the ground, spilling logs in every direction. One piece rolled all the way to Mrs. Mullins's feet, brushing lightly against her leather boots. She looked down, her eyes narrowing. Then, without a word, she dipped a ladle into her wash basin, stepped outside, and flung the dirty water straight at the boy. The cold, filthy splash hit Jace square in the face, soaking the frayed collar of his worn shirt. The stench of raw meat mixed with mud clung to his skin, choking his throat. But Jace didn't flinch. He didn't stand up. He didn't fight back. He just sat there, his hands blindly gathering the scattered firewood from the filthy ground. The wind carried the sour smell and the faint sound of children giggling nearby. A jagged piece of wood splintered, scraping his hand. Blood seeped from the crack between his frost-bitten fingers. He didn't press to stop the bleeding. He held the piece close to his chest for warmth, not healing. Just then a young woman across the street from the bakery noticed him and took a step forward but stopped. Her eyes met Mrs. Mullins's, who stood on her porch with arms crossed, watching. The woman hesitated, then turned back inside and slid the glass door shut. An old truck rumbled past, its tires grinding over the muddy grooves. Jace looked up just for a moment, then dropped his gaze again. The sack of firewood felt twice as heavy now, not just from the wood, but from the weight of the town's stairs pressing down on his back. It took him nearly 15 minutes to gather the firewood back into the sack. He slid a broken stick under the cart to keep the axle from slipping, then tied it down with a strip of cloth. Each movement was slow and deliberate, not because he was skilled, but because he had done this every day for the last 3 years. "Just a little longer, wait for me, little sis," Jace whispered. No one heard, no one came. On the porch, Mrs. Mullins had already turned her back. Across the street, the bakery door remained shut. A gust of wind hissed past the roof, shaking loose a pile of snow that crashed down beside him. Someone had seen, but quickly looked away. Against the pale, frozen street, the only thing left was the small silhouette of a 12-year-old boy dragging a sack up a hill no one wanted to climb. And Jace had no idea that this silent journey, hauling firewood to survive, would one day be the very thing that pulled an entire town out of the dark. Jace dragged the sack of firewood deeper into the central market. As the townspeople began opening their stalls, he stopped quietly in front of Lucille's oven. Mrs. Lucille stepped out from behind the counter, her glare just as sharp as always, and spoke loud enough for everyone around to hear. "I told you already, I don't buy anything from the devil's family." She pointed to the pavement. "Go somewhere else, I don't want your shadow anywhere near my store." Jace lowered his head without a word. He set down the sack of firewood as he always did, but just then 3 boys around his age approached. The biggest one kicked the axle of Jace's pull cart hard enough to flip it over. The firewood crashed to the ground, logs scattering in all directions. One log struck a passerby's leg, but no one stopped to help. The second boy burst out laughing, saying loudly, "Oops, sorry, little devil boy broke his cart." Meanwhile, the third boy bent down, pretended to help pick up a piece of wood, then hurled it back at Jace with a cold, mocking throw. Jace crouched down and began gathering the wood one piece at a time. He didn't say a word, his lips were pressed tight until they bled. His hands, cracked and scratched from the cold, trembled as he tried to fix the broken axle with a strip of cloth. But the moment he stood up, dizziness hit him. His vision blurred, the world spun, and he collapsed face down on the damp ground. His body lay motionless right in the busiest walkway of the market. Everyone saw it, but no one came forward. Mrs. Lucille simply pulled her shop door shut and sighed as if she had just dodged some sort of disaster. Passers-by stepped around Jace like he was a puddle of dirty water. No sympathy in their eyes, not a single word of concern. A little boy about 8, holding his mother's hand, looked over and whispered, "What's wrong with him, Mama?" The mother replied softly, "Don't look, just keep walking," then pulled her child along, gliding past him. The boy lay there, his cheek cold and smeared with dirt, lips pale, his hands still clutching the piece of firewood marked with the grain of a bird's wing. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on the thin fabric of his coat. His pull cart had tipped to one side, the axle bent like a broken arm. At that very moment, a horn blared from the end of the marketplace. Tires screeched against the frozen ground. A military truck, dusted in gray, skidded into the main path, braking hard in the middle of the crowd, forcing people to step back on both sides. The door slammed open. A man in a heavy coat stepped down. He walked with purpose, fast and straight. His gaze swept across the crowd, and no one dared to stop him. He moved toward Jace, knelt down, checked for a pulse, and asked firmly, "This boy, what happened?" No one answered. A few eyes looked his way and then turned away. He repeated the question, louder now, "How long has he been lying here?" Still silence. The soldier slipped one arm under Jace's back and lifted him gently off the ground. Adjusting the boy's posture, he stood up straight and scanned each face around him. Behind the bakery window, Mrs. Lucille stood motionless. The group of 3 boys looked down at their feet. A man shoved his hands into his coat pockets and walked off, pretending he'd never been there. No one spoke, no one stepped forward. No one called for help, the soldier said, calm, not shouting, not angry, but every word landed like a nail hammered into the air. "You saw a child collapse and just watched him lie there." A few people stiffened. An elderly woman muttered something under her breath, but no one replied. He turned, carrying Jace toward the truck. He opened the back door and laid the boy down with the care reserved for something fragile. Wrapping Jace in a military blanket, he reached down to fasten the seat belt. That's when he saw it. A small, crescent-shaped scar on Jace's neck, faint but unmistakable. And in that brief second, the soldier froze as if someone had grabbed him by the throat. A memory burst open in his mind like fire in the dark. The image of his daughter who had perished in a house fire years ago. He shut the door, climbed into the driver's seat, said nothing to anyone, never looked back. He left only one sentence behind: "If this is how you treat a child, then this town isn't worthy of being called a community." The engine roared. The military truck pulled away from the rundown market, leaving behind a snowy, stained courtyard and a collection of stunned eyes. The crowd stood still. Some bowed their heads, others turned away. No one spoke, as if their silence had just been exposed, but what they didn't know was this: that moment would be the last time they could pretend not to see. Because from that point on, no one in Glenmore could ignore the boy who pulled the sack of firewood. And what was coming next would force every eye to turn and face the truth. The military truck came to a stop on the dirt slope leading up to the old field hospital, nestled against the pine-covered hillside. The two-story building made of gray stone had once received wounded soldiers during the Civil War. Now only one room remained in use, the rest lay cloaked in dust and moss. Carter carried Jace through the dim corridor. The lighting was faint, the metal bed frames old but clean, tidied weakly out of a habit no one could quite remember the origin of. He laid the boy down gently, checked his breathing, loosened his collar, and pulled back the blanket. Jace was still unconscious, but his small hand clutched tightly at something wrapped in worn fabric. Carter carefully unwrapped it, a tattered piece of canvas cloth enclosing a small, tarnished bronze badge. He brought it closer to the light where faint engraving caught the dim glow. Holloway Glenmore Fire Department. Carter froze. He knew that name, Holloway. That night, through the crackle of a failing radio, he'd heard the name shouted amid the chaos. Firefighter running into a burning warehouse to save his wife and child. Carter remembered the image clearly, a man cradling a little girl, yelling, disappearing into the smoke. Then came the blast, and the name Holloway was buried with it. Carter's hand clenched, not just because the boy had been abandoned in the market, but because of his eyes. That look, it was the same look his own daughter had given him right before the fire took everything. He sat on the edge of the bed, set the badge down on the table, and kept his eyes on the sleeping boy. In the midst of delirium, Jace whimpered, lips trembling. "Ellie, don't die, I'm back now, don't be scared." A chill ran down Carter's spine. He touched Jace's forehead, cold but no fever. Beneath the thick coat, the boy's body was all skin and bone. Carter opened his pack, took out a bag of IV fluid, inserted the line into the boy's arm, and secured it with gauze. When finished, he stepped back, straightened up, and stared at the ceiling in silence. An hour later, Jace stirred. His eyes landed on Carter, nervous, startled, then quickly looked away. He sat up abruptly, reaching for the IV, but Carter gently held his arm and spoke with a steady voice. "You're safe now, no one's going to hurt you." "Let me go," Jace said, his voice raw. "I have to go back to Ellie." Carter asked, "Who's Ellie?" "I have to go, my little sister, she can't walk, she's home alone, I don't need to be here, please don't save me." Carter said softly, holding back his voice. "You collapsed in the middle of the market, not a single person came to help you, I couldn't just let a child perish in plain sight like that." For the first time, Jace looked him in the eyes, his gaze was bloodshot, silent, like stagnant water. "You don't understand," he said, each word falling like lead. "This whole town wants me gone." Carter didn't reply. In his mind, images from that old fire came rushing back like an unhealed wound. He remembered the screams, the smell of burning wood, the glow of flames dancing across the sign, Glenmore Council Storage. He remembered the shouting, "There's a child in there," then the explosion, and then silence. Quietly he asked, "Your father, what was his name?" "Michael Holloway," Jace answered without hesitation. Carter lowered his head. That name. He stood, walked to the desk, picked up the old badge, held it in his hand for a long moment, then turned back, his voice low. "I saw your father." Night during the fire, Jace flinched. He was trying to save someone. I heard his name over the radio, but by the time I got there, the warehouse had already exploded. Jace bit his lip and nodded, as if replaying a verdict he'd heard 100 times before. People said he was the one who started it. "I know what they say," Jace repeated, quieter this time but steady. "But it's not true." Carter stared into those eyes far too old for a 12-year-old. He didn't say another word. He just sat back down beside the bed, poured a glass of water, and handed it to Jace, who accepted it with trembling hands. There was no defiance in his voice, no begging, just a quiet truth no one had ever bothered to hear. Carter gave a small nod. "I'll take you home, but first I need to verify a few things." That sentence, simple, unpromising, was the first thing any adult had said to Jace in 3 years that didn't push him away. He didn't fully understand, but for the first time, he felt like maybe he wasn't invisible, and in Carter's mind, a door to the past creaked open. The wind from that old fire came rushing in, smoke, guilt, and the terrible feeling that maybe he had once looked at the wrong man. The dirt road leading to the northern edge of Glenmore was riddled with potholes. Carter's truck bounced violently over each one, but he didn't slow down. In the passenger seat, Jace sat silently, both hands gripping the frayed straps of his backpack, eyes fixed on the window, saying nothing. He was fully awake now, but the silence between them had yet to break. "Are we close to your house?" Carter asked, eyes still on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "Past the hill." Then at the burnt-out power pole, turn left, walk 100 more steps, and that's it. Carter nodded, saying no more. The wind whipped through the pine trees like the howling of ghosts from another time. As the truck rounded the final bend, a small wooden house came into view, its roof slanted severely to one side, walls stained with mildew, a cardboard patch taped over where glass should have been. Jace jumped out of the truck before Carter could even reach for the door handle. He ran straight to the porch and pushed open the creaking wooden door. "Ellie," he called out, his voice tight, nearly cracking. A dry cough came from the shadows. "I'm here, I'm okay, you're back." Carter walked slowly toward the doorway and stopped. From outside, he could see the inside clearly, just one low bed placed close to a battered fireplace. Brick walls split with deep cracks, dark stains from water damage running down like bruises. A little girl, maybe 7, lay on her side. Her hair was matted, her cheeks sunken, and her legs wrapped in 2 thin blankets. "Are you cold?" Jace sat down beside the bed, quickly pulling off his coat and laying it gently over her. "I'm not cold. I've been waiting for you since yesterday." Ellie smiled faintly, then broke into a long, dry coughing fit. Carter remained under the porch eaves, eyes locked on the child. He didn't step inside. His foot halted at the threshold, as if one more step would crush something too fragile or cross a line he could never uncross. Ellie coughed again, harder this time, raw and rasping. Carter's brow tightened. He didn't need a stethoscope to recognize that kind of cough. It wasn't just the cold. Jace looked up hesitant. "Would you come in?" Carter gave a small nod, but his eyes never left the little girl. "I need to check your sister. That cough isn't normal. If she stays here much longer, it could get worse fast." Jace lowered his head. His hand gently squeezed Ellie, as if apologizing for not being able to protect her better. Only then did Carter step across the threshold, slowly but with a resolve that said a decision had been made, one that couldn't be undone. "Are you a doctor?" the little girl asked softly. "No, I was a soldier once, so I know a bit about medicine." "Then are you a good person?" Ellie continued. Carter's hand paused midair, a simple question, sharp as a blade. "I don't know," he answered slowly. "I used to think I was, then there came a time I wasn't so sure anymore. But you didn't leave my brother behind. Why not? Everyone else did." Carter looked directly into Ellie's eyes and replied, his voice steady, "Because your brother didn't deserve to be left behind. And because I once left someone behind, someone I still see in my dreams every single night." Ellie didn't say anything more. She turned to Jace and gave a small smile. "I knew it. I knew there'd be someone who wouldn't leave you." On the worn wooden table, Carter noticed a piece of paper folded into quarters tucked beneath a cracked ceramic cup. He picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "If I'm gone, please don't leave the children. If even one person stops, I pray they see. I pray they hear my child." Carter folded the note again and slipped it into his chest pocket. He said nothing, but something inside him, hardened long ago by war, by fire, by loss, cracked just the tiniest bit. Jace sat down, adjusted the blanket around his sister, and spoke softly. "My dad, he didn't start that fire. I know everyone thinks he did, but they're wrong." Carter gave a small nod. "I'm starting to think so, too." Jace looked up at him, his eyes holding the kind of hope that had been waiting a long, long time, waiting for an adult to take his words seriously. That night Carter began, sitting down by the fire. His voice was slow, like he was unraveling something knotted tight in his mind. "I was on the emergency team, got the call over the radio near midnight. Someone shouted, clear as day, 'Holloway inside, he's carrying a kid, still alive.'" Carter swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. "By the time I got there, the warehouse exploded. There was nothing left, just the sound of people pointing fingers." Jace lifted his head. His eyes were red, but not from smoke. He trembled not from the cold, but from the weight of hearing, for the first time in years, someone speak of his father without suspicion. "They said he set the fire to cover something up," Carter went on, his gaze still locked on the fire. "But what I saw, it didn't add up. Something was off, really off." Jace looked down, then suddenly raised a hand to cover his face. His shoulders trembled. A choked sound escaped him like grief pressed so deep it had to claw its way up. I tried to tell them, he whispered, that my dad wasn't like that, but they all shook their heads. They looked at me like I had fire running in my veins. Carter turned back, looking at the boy with eyes that understood. No one ever listened, huh? Jace nodded slowly, tears falling onto the worn fabric of his shirt. Never, not until now. A heavy silence settled over the wooden room. Carter reached over, poured a glass of water, and gently placed it in the boy's hands. Well then, starting today, you won't have to speak alone anymore. The quiet stretched between the three of them, between the cold stillness and the scent of rotting wood in the cabin. Carter looked over at Ellie, her eyes dull, her skin pale, her breathing ragged like it was coming apart in pieces. He walked over and sat at the edge of the bed. Laying a hand on her forehead, he frowned softly. She's burning up. She always does whenever the wind changes, Jace mumbled. The doctor in town doesn't treat anyone from the Holloway family. I tried to get medicine once. They said they don't sell to us. Carter stood up and pulled his phone from his coat pocket. Then I'll take your sister to the hospital in the next county. No begging, no waiting, just what needed to be done. Jace gripped his sister's hand and shook his head. If you do that, the whole town will hate you. Carter looked down at the boy. I'm not here to be liked. Then he turned to Ellie again. Her eyes blinked faintly, too weak to ask questions. Carter gently rested his hand over the thin blanket and spoke like a promise. We're not leaving anyone behind, not ever again. Night had settled over the hill of retired soldiers. The wind hissed through the gaps in the wooden door. Pine branches scraped against each other, making sparse, hollow sounds like distant knocking from a place far away. Carter sat alone in the second-floor room of the veterans' boarding house. The room contained nothing more than a writing desk, a foldable bed, an old bookshelf, and a file he had kept locked away since 2019 in a rusted metal drawer. Earlier that afternoon, he had taken Ellie to the county hospital 30 miles out of town. The doctor said she would need long-term treatment. There was still a chance she could recover if intervention came in time and with proper care. Carter didn't hesitate. He signed every document without a second thought. He also called an old friend who managed a winter training camp, asking him to take care of Jace for a few days, to give the boy a warm bed, hot meals, and a place where no one looked at him like he was a monster. Now, the room was filled only with the ticking of a clock and the weight of one man torn between past and present. Carter opened the drawer, his hand pausing for a few seconds above the lock. Then he turned the dial. Click. The drawer slid open, releasing a scent of old paper and ash, as if time itself shuddered at being disturbed. He spread the file across the desk. Crime scene photos, warehouse diagrams, recorded radio chatter, all sealed away years ago under the conclusion, accidental fire due to negligence. But now Jace's voice kept echoing in his head. My father didn't do it, but no one believed me. Carter reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled slip of paper, the note he had picked up from the tiny altar in the wooden house, a woman's handwriting, shaky and slanted. If I'm gone, please don't abandon the children. They are innocent. Believe them, even if the whole world doesn't. Carter's eyes lingered on that line for a long time. They are innocent, he repeated, the words dry and brittle like a vow. The fire from that year, he remembered it vividly. By the time he arrived, the building was already consumed by flames. People pointed to Holloway's body without hesitation, blaming him as if by instinct. But where had the fire really started? Why were there screams from the office? And why had he never asked those questions again? Carter clenched his fists, staring hard at a smoke-stained photo of a man running through the flames with a child in his arms. If he'd been wrong, then that boy hadn't just been dragging a sack of firewood all these years. He'd been dragging the weight of a wrongful verdict. Carter opened the file again, page after page, yellowed at the edges, covered in his own tight handwriting. Notes from the investigation into the warehouse fire at the Glenmore Council Center. A case closed in just 3 weeks with a conclusion stamped in ink. Electrical short in the archive storage, accidental. But he remembered clearly that night hadn't gone like they said. He remembered the alarm blaring during his shift, the acrid, suffocating stench of burning plastic. He remembered the soldier, Holloway, bursting in like a man possessed, screaming for his daughter amid the flames. Carter had once thought he understood that case, had once accepted the official report. But now, after seeing Jace, hearing Ellie's voice, reading the letter from a mother long gone, and looking into the boy's eyes as he said, "This whole town wants me gone," something inside him stirred. He flipped to the page with the scene photo, a black and white aerial shot, grainy but still clear enough. Flames had started on the east side where the council's records office stood, not the west side's flammable material shed as the report claimed. Why the discrepancy? Why hadn't anyone brought it up? And why had all the blame fallen on Holloway, the man who ran into the fire, not away from it? Carter sat up straight, reached for his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Garrett, a former firefighter, Carter's old teammate, abruptly reassigned after the blaze. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. A gravelly voice came through the line, half guarded, half like it had been expecting this moment. "Thought you'd never call." Carter rested his elbow on the desk, fingers absently turning an old, rusted lighter. "Need to meet. It's about Glenmore tomorrow." On the other end, a soft sigh drifted into the receiver. A short silence, just long enough for Carter to know the man was remembering something bitter. "I knew you circle back to this since the day they forced me out, since the way you looked at the scene but didn't say a word." Garrett cleared his throat, then spoke slowly, evenly. "All right, the old repair station, back road through the woods, 100 sharp, but you better brace yourself. Some things can't be said gently." Carter didn't reply. He just stared at the blurred photo on his desk, his eyes cutting through the layers of ash and memory. The wind swept across the old roof again. Carter stood motionless in the room, his eyes fixed on the file in front of him. He was facing a truth heavier than fire, the truth that he might have bowed his head to a lie, and if that was true, then he had helped bury a family in darkness they'd never rise from. The following afternoon, Carter drove down the muddy, red dirt road at the southern edge of town, where the charred brick foundation of the old warehouse still stood alone in a field of yellowing grass. Nearby, a tin shack with a sagging gray roof sat sunken between 2 low mounds. An old wooden sign hanging crooked by the door read, "Garrett's Weld and Fix, closed down." He brought the car to a stop. The air was still. Wind moaned through rusted tin sheets, making a low, aching creak. The shop door was slightly ajar. Carter pushed it open without knocking and stepped inside. Garrett was hunched over, welding a broken steel frame. His shirt was frayed at the shoulders, hair the color of ash, and his back bowed as if carrying 5 years' worth of silence. Hearing footsteps, he paused, removed his safety goggles, but didn't look up. "You came after all." His voice was dry and hoarse, not surprised, but expectant. Carter stood still for a moment before speaking. "Too many things don't add up. The report doesn't match the kid's story and the memories from that night." Garrett set his tools down, turned around, locking eyes with him. "You had doubts back then, didn't you?" Carter didn't deny it. "I did, but when you suddenly resigned after the incident, I thought you chose silence." Garrett let out a hollow chuckle, bitter beneath the sound. "I didn't choose it. I was going to turn in the original records, but early the next morning the captain and someone from the town council came into my office, left a termination letter on my desk and said, 'Off the record, you want peace, rip it up.' And I did." Carter stepped closer to the desk, his eyes flicking toward a steel cabinet used for storing files. "And now, why are you telling me this?" Garrett was silent for a few seconds, then slowly, almost like a confession, "Because I heard the boy's name, Jace Holloway. Because I saw him dragging that sack of firewood across the square as if he was dragging my guilt with him. I can't die with this buried inside me." He opened the cabinet, took out an old folder tied with a faded cloth string, and placed it on the desk. The original blueprint and a photo from the scene I never turned in. The fire started in the admin office, not where they said it did. Carter unfolded the drawing. His eyes landed on a red circle marked on the east side of the warehouse. "A place only council staff had access to," he muttered. Garrett nodded. His voice dropped to a low murmur. "That night I heard glass shatter. Someone screamed from that room." He paused, a painful memory. "But after I was forced out of the force, I convinced myself maybe it's better to let it all fade away." But then that boy grew up in silence with his father's name dragged through the mud. He pulled another photo from the file, a black and white shot, the corner burned, taken in the administrative hallway. I stayed quiet, and he paid the price for me, a 12-year-old kid. Carter took the photo, his grip tightening around it. And now if I stay silent, then I'm no different from you." He stared at the picture, unmoving. This was the first real proof. Not just blueprints, but a living witness, someone who heard the scream, saw where the fire began, knew it had all been buried, and kept his mouth shut for 5 long years. "Does anyone else know about this?" Carter asked. "No, the others took early retirement. A few just vanished from the record." "This town," Carter whispered, "it buried both the fire and the truth." Garrett sank into his chair, letting out a tired breath. "I used to think staying silent would keep the kids safe, but peace doesn't come from hiding things, it comes from facing them." Carter folded the blueprint and tucked it into his inner pocket. He didn't need anything else. The wall had cracked, and what lay behind it was ready to come to light. He turned toward the door. "No thank you," just a quiet nod. Garrett didn't get up, didn't look back. He returned to his welding bench, slid his goggles on, and let the torch flare back to life. Not to hide something this time, but to mend what had been broken. Night fell over the town square of Glenmore. The town hall stood silent, as if it had long forgotten its purpose. Inside, a dim yellow light flickered in the security room, casting shadows across the dusty window panes. A place that was once the nerve center of an entire community, now cold and hollow, like an archive of unfinished memories. Carter moved quietly along the north wall, coat zipped up, hood pulled low over his brow, his eyes locked on the steel side door, where faded silver lettering peeled away from the surface. "Archives, authorized personnel only." He gripped his phone lightly. On the screen, just a short message from Max. "Okay, 15 minutes." Max, an old friend who used to work in the town hall's tech department, now in charge of HVAC maintenance and internal infrastructure, was the only person Carter could still trust. And the only person who ever knew that the 2019 records hadn't been destroyed entirely. They'd been sealed off and stored in the sub-basement. It was Garrett who'd said it 2 days ago, pointing to a crime scene map and whispering, "If you really want to know who burned down the storage building, you'll have to go to the ground floor of Town Hall. There's a budget ledger that was marked for disposal, but I'd bet Max knows where it ended up." A faint click echoed, metal grinding softly like teeth clenching. The secondary electronic lock had just been released remotely. Without hesitation, Carter pushed the door open. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, its concrete walls stained and uneven. A motion sensor bulb flickered on, then went dark again. He followed the layout Max had sent, left past the old supply closet, then down a creaky wooden staircase. Every step echoed in the cavernous space. The air grew heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten paper as Carter descended deeper into the town hall's belly. He reached the bottom of the stairs, a faint glow from an emergency light illuminating a vast, dusty room filled with rows of metal filing cabinets. This was it, the sub-basement. Max's map guided him to a specific section, marked with an old, peeling label, 2019 Council Records, Disposal Pending. Carter pulled on the handle of a locked cabinet. It groaned, then clicked open. Inside, tucked behind stacks of forgotten reports, he found it, a thick, leather-bound budget ledger. Its cover was plain, but as he flipped it open, the pages inside were crisp, filled with meticulous entries. One page, half-torn and stained, listed a series of large, unexplained payments made around the time of the fire. Payments linked directly to a name he recognized, a name of a prominent figure in Glenmore. The truth had been here all along, hidden in plain sight, protected by the town's collective blindness. Glenmore had scorned Jace, had abandoned him, and allowed him to carry the weight of a horrific lie. But the soldier, driven by his own ghosts and a fierce sense of justice, had pulled back the curtain. The town had turned its back, but now a storm of truth was about to break, and Glenmore would never be the same.